I have visited a lot of military cemeteries, and I've been in Arlington and what have you, but I believe what most people believe. I believe it's special ground with heroes and people that sacrifice for their country and their fellow Americans. My name is Carmine Iosue, and in Italian it's Carmine Iosue. I've been very blessed. My wife and I raised 6 children, but we also created 3 different companies, successful companies, and we determined to donate money to good causes. And what we do is we give money to people we know that the money will be spent correctly. One of my friends suggested I meet General Jim Mokoyama. He's a major general, a fantastic person. He was instrumental and one of the key leaders that got the Japanese-American World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. I told him about my dad, and then I listened because he knew all about the 100th Battalion and the 442nd Regiment. I knew very little about it. I did try to do a little bit of research and understand, but my dad never really talked about the military, rarely talked about it. Occasionally would say 1 or 2 things. General Jim, he said, "I'll talk as long as you'll listen." and he filled me in, and I'm happy to say thank you to the Japanese-American vets and families and how much respect we all have for their contribution. When the 442nd soldiers joined and when my dad and family joined, it was for the duration. When you went to Europe, you were coming back wounded, dead, or the war was over. My dad, Nicholas Iosue, was an immigrant. They took a boat over. My grandmother was 8 months pregnant, and she took a boat from Naples to Toronto. And my dad was born right after the cruise was over, and after he was about a month or so, he came to the United States with the visa. And they all went to New York City, so he was about 19 years old when World War II started. He completed 2 years of college at Manhattan College, and then enlisted in the Army. My dad became a tank driver, was in the Armored Division with General Patton, all through North Africa. And interestingly enough, he was in Tunis, Tunisia, and he was approached by a colonel who said, "Sergeant Iosue, what are you doing here?" And my dad said, "I've been in the Army for 2 years. I went across North Africa." He said, "Well, the United States Army is not allowed to send non-citizens into war, and you're not an American citizen. In fact, tomorrow we're attacking Sicily, which is Italy, and you're an Italian citizen. Raise your right hand." He said, "You are now a citizen of the United States." And so then my dad was at the beachheads and all through Sicily and up through southern Italy. And he was in a truck in battle, and he got hit by an artillery shell. And he was severely wounded, and I guess a bloody mess at the time in the field. And he coincidentally was fighting alongside the 442nd. They were side by side. And when they saw my dad's dog tags, it said Iosue, and the medic assumed he was Japanese. Again, he was fighting right alongside the 442nd. And so they put him in. At the time, the United States Army was segregated. There was African American units, white units, and Asian American units. And so they put my dad in a field hospital for Japanese soldiers, Japanese American. So they cleaned up my dad, and he's now in the 442nd Field Hospital. And they tried to take my dad out, and my dad said, "I prefer to stay." And so my dad stayed with the 442nd in Italy while he was healing. Just imagine this, you're in battle, and then you're in a military hospital. Imagine how traumatic that is. And the people all around you are supporting you. They don't know you're Caucasian, black. You're a wounded vet. That's it. They're your support group. You're in the same platoon. You're in the same company. And when he was there, he was very comfortable. They treated him like a soldier, and he saw no reason to leave. When he got back to the States, they put him in a hospital in Ithaca, New York, a military hospital. He was there for 3 years, and he had 57 operations. And they tried to save both his legs. So they sent him home because after 3 years, the surgeon said, "We can't save your legs." And where my dad was, everybody was amputees. no arms, no legs. My dad was in pain every minute of the day. I never heard him complain. Not one time. I think that's true of many of the veterans. They didn't talk about it, they didn't complain. They were happy to be alive and back with their families. My dad fell down the stairs. He was on crutches. They rushed him to a medical hospital, a military hospital. Somehow the surgeon saved his legs. They became lifelong friends, the surgeon and my dad. Once a year they'd go out, the two couples, out of respect for each other and gratitude. Very rarely, if ever, talked about their experiences, but the one or two things I did learn, one of which was my dad's involvement with the 442nd. He was very active with the American Legion and a Disabled American Veterans Organization. And they had a convention in 1975 in Honolulu, and my dad contacted some of his friends from World War II who were the Nisei soldiers. And when he got here, they put him up in a Royal Hawaiian Hotel. They wouldn't let my dad pay for anything. And they had a banquet in his honor. They made him feel like a hero, which he didn't think he deserved because he didn't view himself as anything special, which is one of the things I really respected him for. He thought they were heroes because he saw what happened to the 442nd and heard stories from them. And I guess the amazing thing was they weren't negative either. I guess the soldiers that were wounded from the 442nd were like the people he saw in Ithaca, New York. They were positive about their service and felt there was a purpose to what they did. I was born in October 1945. I lived in an Italian-American community along with an Irish community. So all my family lived on one block and we're a very, very close family. In my case, my family were from Italy, but they were Americans. So I lived in an Italian-American community, 100,000 relatives and family. I felt very safe, but we were encouraged not to talk Italian. We were Americans. We lived in a lower middle income area on purpose. And when I got older, I said to my dad, you have a responsible job, and we could have lived in Clove Lakes, a middle income or an upper middle income area. But it seemed important to my mom and dad that we live where we live because we'd see a broad brush of American people. Different ethnic groups, different religions, all getting along. So we were all mixed, and everybody knew everyone's mom and dad. So my school was 90% African American. Even though I was in New York City and had a very mixed community, I never really thought about prejudice. To me, it was a very warm environment. Now, when I got older, I did notice more prejudice of people. And then when I became an adult, I saw even more. In the military, I saw a lot. But I saw continuously a lot of attempts to overcome things like that. But with regard to Asian Americans, I was amazed because I never would have thought of it if it wasn't for my dad having that incident and then making those friends. And you judge people by what you hear from your family, and my dad had a lot of respect for his comrades. And I felt the same way about the 442nd. They were dedicated. They were in the front all the time because even when they got into the military, there was still prejudice. I remember talking to some Japanese families that I knew where the parents or the dads were in the war, saying some of the leaders in the army thought by putting Japanese soldiers, American soldiers in the front, they'd confuse the Germans, which that's not what happens in a war. People don't get confused. They're shooting at each other. They don't. And that's where additional respect comes, because despite overcoming prejudice, still being dedicated to doing their best and making their families proud. Much like my family, they didn't have to go in the war. They volunteered. So for my grandfather and grandmother to leave Italy, they knew they were never going back. And they knew they were going with nothing and having to create a life for themselves and their family. I view it as my grandparents came for me. And I think my father felt that way. And I'm sure the people of the 442nd felt the same way, that their ancestors, their grandparents, so parents who came from Japan to Hawaii, did it to give their children a better life and more opportunity than they had in Japan. I know that's how my family felt. But it was a huge sacrifice. They didn't do it for immediate satisfaction. They did it for the family. And it was important to me that I get the respect of my parents, make them proud of me. I feel the 442nd Soldiers felt the same way. So my dad died when he was 54. When he died, I remember 2 or 3 buses of people came from his office to show respect for the family and my dad. I was deeply moved because there were a lot of African Americans, there were a lot of Asian Americans, there were a lot of white. It's what his life was. He must have treated a lot of people with respect to get that kind of respect and been a truly nice person to a lot of people. What did my dad do? He just lived his life and set a good example. I think everybody can do that. Everyone can lead a good life. Yeah, you don't have to feel special. In fact, I've noticed in life there's 2 kinds of people that think they're special and people that think they're lucky. I like to be around the people that think they're lucky. But when you can do it to people you don't know, different cultures, it makes it even better. It's easy to be good to your neighbor or to your family. The fact that you can do it to people you don't even know or the different culture is really what makes life better for everybody. And I think my dad set that example, so did my mother. And I try to do the same thing, so. And he lit up like a firecracker. Go for broke.